Hi, everyone, and welcome to StrandExplains. I'm Sakshi, and as always, I'm joined by RK. Hi, RK, how are you?
Hi, Sakshi. How are you today?
Good, good, thanks. So, today, RK and I thought we'd talk about the Janssen vaccine by Johnson and Johnson's. There's a lot of buzz about it. It's the new single dose vaccine, which is really promising and really exciting. So, yeah, we thought we'd just jump into it. So, first of all, RK, can you talk about why? So, like I mentioned, we will get into the nitty gritties, but the Johnson and Johnson vaccine is a single dose vaccine. Why is
Yeah.
that so cool? Why is that so important, RK? Can you maybe talk to why that is?
Yeah. Uh, it's a single dose is just half of two doses, and that means half the logistics,
Yeah.
really. So that's one element of it. The other is half the uncertainty, right? So, for instance, um, if someone were to receive the vaccine
Mhm.
um, today, they don't have to come in 28 days later, and so you don't have to track them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's really how most vaccines are, right? I mean,
Yeah.
your BCG vaccine or your tuberculosis vaccine or whatnot, or your flu shot, you just come in once and you're done, right? So that's sort of more a traditional vaccine paradigm.
No, that makes sense. And like you said, that coming back in again and getting to track people can be really difficult. And
Yeah,
even if nothing else, people are scared to travel outside in times of COVID. You have to go back, right? That can be
yeah,
scary in itself. So, yeah, it's
yeah,
really nice that
yeah.
they've come out with this single dose vaccine. So, just to get into what the vaccine is and how it's working, like we saw with the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Janssen vaccine is a non-replicating viral vector. So it like we saw in the AZ vaccine, and please refer back to that. We have some diagrams in terms of how what it looks like on the inside, but it's just a adenovirus which has been genetically modified to also have the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, right? What's really cool about the Janssen vaccine is they're using something called the ADVAC technology that they've come up with themselves. And what this means is when it's introduced to the human body, it mounts both a cellular and a humoral immune response. Aki, what does that really mean? I'm not great at immunology, so what does humoral and immune mean? Like, what does it mean for someone getting vaccinated with this?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I am not an immunologist. But just to sort of define the terms,
Hmm.
uh, cellular by cellular immune response, they mean T cells, and
Okay.
specifically a certain class of T cells called killer cells, basically, or
Hmm.
cytotoxic T cells. And so these T cells are literally, they kill other cells. That's what they do, right? So
Hmm.
that's the cellular part of the immune response. And then the humoral immune response is basically the immune response that's sort of in steady state what you get, right? So those are the antibodies that people talk about.
I see.
It's also what you test for when you do a serum test. So when you take someone's blood and you're trying to figure out if they ever had an immune response, what you're
Hmm.
measuring is the humoral immune response, right? So that's as far as the definitions go. What they're trying to say is that this ADVAC tech
Hmm.
is recruiting more types of immune cells to the site of potential infection,
Hmm.
and training more such cells to recognize these antigens, these COVID-19 antigens. And given that there are more types of immune cells involved in the response, you're likely to have a more effective response to the antigen. That's what they're trying to say.
I see. That's pretty cool. And so, I mean, with that explanation, maybe I'll get into what the efficacy we've seen is. So currently, there have been two clinical trials that have taken place, two phase 3 clinical trials that have taken place. One is for the single dose regime, and one is for two dose regime. The two dose regime vaccine, the trial is still ongoing, and we are still waiting to hear back efficacy results from that. But the single dose regime, or it's called the ensemble study, they have Johnson and Johnson has announced preliminary results as of Jan 29th or 2021. Now, what they saw was that this vaccine has, with a single dose, the vaccine has about an 85% efficacy rate. However, this number is an average overall. So they did the study in, I think it was 8 countries in 3 regions. So they did it in America or the US, they did it in South Africa and in Latin America. And overall, they saw 85% efficacy. However, geographically, this differed. So, for instance, in South Africa, where most of the cases they saw were from the new strain, and we will get to that in a second, the efficacy was about 57%. However, in countries like the United States, they saw 72% efficacy. Another thing to note,
I see.
interestingly, was they saw that in very severe cases, the efficacy was much higher. So the wording is very interesting. The way they've said it is the vaccine candidate was 85% effective in preventing severe disease across all regions studied. And it was 66% effective at preventing the study's combined endpoints of moderate and severe COVID-19. So Aki, can you talk about what this means in terms of these averages and severe versus moderate, and how to really interpret and understand these different efficacy numbers?
Um, Honestly, I wish, I knew.
Mhm,
It's These are very interesting numbers. I do want to say at the outset that this is a very detailed breakup of efficacy. I think probably, yeah, I think people are learning how to report these numbers as more and more vaccines for COVID-19 get out there. And so it's really nice to see this kind of granularity. I guess what they're trying to say is that, um, look, this vaccine X can, basically prevent like super difficult symptoms of COVID, like, people go into like cytokine storm, and,
mhm,
they have to be hospitalized, all kind, they have nervous damage, and all kinds of implications, right?
yeah,
So if you get this vaccine, what they're trying to say is that you're probably not going to see that many
mhm,
severe symptoms. But what they're also in the same breath seem to be saying,
mhm,
is that for the majority of the population who are sort of moderately symptomatic, uh, it's probably you're probably going to do better than if you didn't get the vaccine, but
mhm,
maybe not by a whole lot, right? So,
mhm.
um, I guess these numbers are meant to encourage those who feel they're at higher risk
Yeah,
to get the vaccine.
yeah,
Um, and maybe that transparency encourages that sort of a profile in the kinds of people, and those are also the kinds of people perhaps being prioritized after, of course, the first line care workers and so on.
definitely. And I think, speaking to what you're saying about people who are at higher risk, what I found
Mm.
really interesting, again, with this very intense granularity, is that
Yeah,
41% of the participants had comorbidities. So, about nearly 1 in 3 of them had obesity,
I
10% had
see.
hypertension, type 2 diabetes. So, I think and that could also be contributing to these efficacy numbers maybe not being as high, is because they're taking a much larger recruitment stage and they have fewer exclusion criteria,
I
and
see.
so I think that might be one of the reasons why. But it also, I think, it's promising, because that means you don't need to be as worried about taking this vaccine, especially for people who are over the age of 60. 34% of the trial was over 60. It was 14,600 people or something like that.
that's that's a
Um,
great point. So
yeah.
remember, we talked about this in the previous one of our previous podcasts, where we were
Mhm.
talking about how people slightly older might hesitate to take these
Yeah.
vaccines. And you bring up a very valid point. And so people might be asking, if I have type 2 diabetes, should I take this vaccine? If I have if I'm obese, if I have high blood pressure, etc., etc.
Mhm.
And the fact that these cohorts are compiled of people, sorry, they comprise of people who have the, who at least partially fit these profiles of
Yep.
comorbidities, that means that at least it's safe to take for these people,
Yep.
and it prevents severe symptoms, right? So really, that's sort of the takeaway that I get from this.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. That seems to make sense to me. I will say that the Johnson and Johnsons, I read quite a few of these announcements so far. I've read the Pfizer one, the Moderna one. I've been trying to keep up with it. The Johnson one is the most detailed I personally have read so far. And
Yeah,
like you're saying, there's a lot of granularity at that level, and I think that's great. I mean, I'm a big advocate for transparency in science and open communication.
yeah,
So very, very encouraging. Now coming to the new strains, I think that's what's on everyone's mind, trying to understand.
yes.
And like I mentioned, what was really interesting about this specific clinical trial is it took place in the three regions where we're seeing the new strains crop up in the United States, Latin America, and in South Africa. Um, Now we have, like I said, these vaccines are showing efficacy against the new strains. However, how much that might be is yet to be seen. What this that second clinical trial I mentioned, which was the clinical trial that's being done in two doses, what they're trying to see, is my understanding of it at least, is whether that the two-dose regime might be more effective for the new strains. So
I see.
those numbers we mentioned, that 57%, 66%, those are single dose efficacy from the single dose clinical trial, right? And like you mentioned, RK, it's better than not taking it at all, not having anything.
Right.
You know, as we mentioned in previous podcasts, the WHO was originally going for over 50% efficacy. So all these numbers are, are over that. And with these new strains, what we're seeing is it is more efficacious, and fingers crossed that when that second clinical trial data comes out, the two-dose regime might be more effective overall. One other thing we have mentioned, just generally when we've been talking about these vaccines, is storage temperature and distribution, and how
Yeah.
that really makes a difference to how accessible these vaccines are, especially in more rural areas. And so, okay, what do you know what's happening on that aspect in terms of the storage temp and how it might be distributed?
Yeah, yeah. So again, as I said, first of all, one dose, right? And second of all,
Mhm.
this vaccine is pretty much stable at room temperature, right? 2 to 8 Celsius, and stable for 2 years at a slightly cooler temperature of -20 Celsius. Because
Mhm.
it's the adenovirus vector.
Yeah.
And generally, those are slightly more straightforward to store,
Yeah.
right? And again, implications for developing countries versus perhaps developed countries for sure,
Yeah.
where logistics chains are not really equipped in developing
Mhm.
countries to handle large volumes of uh, vaccines that need to be stored at very low temperatures.
Mhm.
And so this does have implications for developing countries, and it's not surprising that it is aiming to make 1 billion doses this year. And I think it really makes sense for the vaccines with this kind of a dosing and this kind of a storage profile.
Mhm. I see. And I think on that note, they have currently Johnson & Johnson is currently applying for FDA approval for emergency usage authorization (EUA). And this has happened early Feb, both in America and in Europe. And hopefully by late Feb, early March, we should see what's happening and find out whether it gets approved. It's definitely something I'm very excited about. I think these vac this these results, especially given that it's a single dose vaccine, are very, very encouraging. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add that I think often when we are in the middle of history being made, we don't really quite see it. But really,
Mhm.
history being made with all of these vaccines coming out as quickly as they are now, and
Yeah.
the scales are, well, the scale is the scale of humanity, right? It's almost like given no option but to produce at that scale. We've sort of risen to that challenge, in as sort of a group of pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers and governments and whatnot. And we're
Mhm.
really like attempting to tackle this head on, which is um, very encouraging.
Yeah.
And at the same time, numbers are falling in, well, India, where we live. Numbers have been down for a while. And the US, where, a lot of our clients and relationships and friends are, the numbers are steadily dropping since January, or actually since December, really.
Mhm.
So overall, at this moment in time, it is actually quite a positive picture.
That's definitely true. And I mean, it's easy to get swept up in just still being stressed out and feeling, cooped up and whatever. But like you're saying, things are looking up. I read somewhere that there's some amount of stagnation that people feel now that those first three vaccines that come out, people are like, okay, we're done now. But whether it's the Janssen vaccine or the Novavax vaccine, it is encouraging that there's still so much going on, and it's such a collaborative effort, like you mentioned, where the whole world is really coming together to deal with this together. So that it's pretty cool, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we can end there. Thanks so much, RK. This was great. Really enjoyed
Thank
talking
you,
to you.
Sakshi.
Bye.
Until the next installment of our vaccine and coronavirus what podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.